Chris Bowen, welcome to the program.
Morning, David. Morning, everyone.
That was you back in 2019. Is what Labor's now considering something you would describe as a retrospective tax as well?
No, there were particular elements about Scott Morrison's plan which were backdated, but the key point there is that Labor was backing measures to make superannuation more sustainable and more equitable, and indeed we suggested at that time it could go a bit further. But what we're talking about here, David, is a very sensible discussion led by the Treasurer about making sure our superannuation system is sustainable and equitable. And I've seen, Liberals frothing at the mouth at those words, saying how outrageous it is that our superannuation system, we should even consider making it more sustainable or more equitable. I mean, superannuation was a Labor invention to give working people a chance at a dignified retirement. We're very proud of it, we'll build on it, and we will make it sustainable and equitable as well.
Let's turn to your current portfolio. The government, of course, need the Greens to pass three major bills at the moment, including your changes to the safeguards mechanism. The Greens aren't happy, as mentioned earlier. They reckon you're making the climate problem worse, in fact, by approving more coal seam gas fracking in Queensland. That will increase emissions, won't it?
Well, let's look at what we're trying to do here, David, and I'm more than happy to go through the details of particular elements of it. But firstly, let's just lay out what we're trying to do here. What I'm trying to do as the Minister, what the government's doing, is reducing emissions from all our big emitters as a whole. New, old, existing, proposed, industrial, resources. Now, the Greens are focusing on one particular element, new resources. They can do that. That's okay. But I'm doing something a bit different here. This is the biggest chance the Parliament has had in more than a decade to actually get a sensible framework to reduce emissions from all our big emitters. As I said, anybody who emits more than 100,000 tonnes a year. Now, this is 205 million tonnes of emissions out of the system by 2030. That's roughly equivalent to 2/3 of the cars on Australia's roads. So that's a big deal, David. And that's why we're focused so importantly on getting this through. Now, inevitably, when you bring in a big reform like this, a whole bunch of people will say it doesn't go far enough. A whole bunch of other people will say it goes far too far. The Coalition have written themselves out of the story and made themselves irrelevant. So we're now in discussions with the Greens. And as I've said repeatedly, if they have good faith proposals, just as we did on other matters before the Parliament, the climate bill, EV tax cuts, etc., then we'll work them through.
Okay, and I'll come to those proposals. But just back to the question, opening new gas fields or expanding gas fields will increase emissions, won't it?
Well, inevitably, any new development has emissions implications, whether it's industrial or resources, David. That's why I'm so determined to get a framework in place to see those emissions come down. Now, if the safeguards reforms don't pass, then there's no constraint on carbon in our biggest emitters. Emissions will continue to go up, just as they have since the safeguards reforms were brought down in 2016.
But the Greens' point is you're not really constraining them because all these big companies can just buy offsets.
Well, on offsets, David, because we are proposing a pretty ambitious agenda of 4.9% emissions reduction each and every year, of course we are allowing some flexibility because...
Well, unlimited flexibility, isn't it? They can buy as many as they want.
Well, David, when you're looking at the biggest emitters, they have different options available to them. Now, some will find it easier than others. I believe emitters will look at the least cost, most efficient way of reducing emissions in their actual facilities, but some will find that hard, like cement, for example. Now, if people want to argue for limits on offsets, they have to show me how an industry like cement could reduce emissions without laying people off or reducing production. I don't want to see Australia making fewer things or investing in less technology. I want to see Australia making more things and investing in more technology. And that's why this regime that we're putting forward, this safeguards reform, is so important, because it takes 205 million tonnes of emissions out of the air. Yes, it provides some flexibility, but when you're embarking on such an ambitious proposal, you should provide flexibility.
So why then, alongside all that, do we need new coal and gas projects?
Well, the Greens suggest that there's this pipeline of automatic approvals, which is just not right. Now, ultimately, David, the Greens need to decide here.
No, I'm just...
Are they a part...
Can I ask about your position here?
Yes.
I appreciate you want to have a go at the Greens. Why do you think we should not ban new coal and gas?
I will get to that point, David. I just want to make this point. The Greens need to decide. Are they a party of protest or a party of progress? This is big progress. If they want to protest, they can do that. But this is about progress. Now, on
so why won't you ban coal and gas, new coal and gas?
Well, on new proposals, David, we are taking our national energy market to 82% renewables by 2030. That's a big lift from where we are at roughly around 30% in 83 months. That's a huge task, but it still means that 18% will come from non-renewables, inevitably. Now, eventually we'll build from that 82, but in the medium term, we are still going to have 18% of our energy grid coming from non-renewables, and increasingly that'll be gas. As coal-fired power stations leave the system, we're not going to do nuclear. That leaves gas.
So can you just say no new coal, at least?
Well, our job is to ensure that we have the capacity to ensure that our lights stay on as we make this massive transformation, which is the biggest economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution.
And do we need new coal mines to do that?
Well, David, the only coal matter that has been decided by this government is Tanya Plibersek's decision to reject Clive Palmer's coal mine. I mean, she will continue to do her job in the very passionate, effective and competent way that she has shown in the first 9 months of government.
But in your pathway to net zero, do we need new coal?
Well, David, the Labor Party is not proposing any new coal mines.
So why don't you just say to the Greens, we'll ban new coal?
Well, because we believe in insisting that the regime is improved so that emissions come down from everyone, all big emitters. At the same time, Tanya's reforming the EPBC Act in line with the Samuel recommendations, which recommended much greater transparency about emissions from approvals. She's getting on with that job. I'm getting on with the job of tightening the safeguards mechanism to actually get real emissions reduction
so
into the system.
There won't be any sort of ban or any sort of time frame as to when we can stop opening up new coal and gas?
No, that's not part of our agenda, and it won't be part of those negotiations.
So on gas, there's also the Beetaloo Basin in the Northern Territory, and a decision pretty soon, we understand, from the Northern Territory government about whether to allow full-scale gas fracking there. Last time you were on this program, you agreed if that is to be opened up, it needs to be fully offset, no net increase in emissions. Is that still your position, and how is that going to be achieved?
Well, and that is the position of the Commonwealth and the Northern Territory government, which was the recommendation of the Pepper Review, which is what governs the consideration of these matters in the Northern Territory, that there be no net increase in emissions. I mean, all parties are technically committed to net zero. All parties. Technically the Liberals, even though they don't really believe it. Technically the Nationals, even though they really don't believe it.
On Beetaloo, if there's going to be no net increase in emissions, will that involve the Commonwealth chipping in to buy offsets?
No, well, these are matters for the Northern Territory government to consider. And
so nothing from the Commonwealth?
No, I'm not proposing any particular Commonwealth action in relation to the Beetaloo, no.
Because
not in relation
the Chief
to that.
Minister, Natasha Files, is looking to the Commonwealth to ensure that happens.
David, these are ongoing discussions, but, you know, as I said, my job is to get emissions down from all our emitters. I understand the focus on gas and coal and oil in this discussion. That's very important. But so is finally getting a regime in place which reduces emissions from all our biggest emitters.
OK, but just coming back to that question, the Beetaloo Basin, if that opens up, there'll be nothing from the Commonwealth to help offset it?
There have been no discussions between the Commonwealth and the Northern Territory government about that, no.
OK. Well, on the one of the compromise options that the Greens are talking about, and you referenced it, the EPBC Act. This is putting a climate trigger in environmental laws so that approvals have to consider the climate impact before a project goes ahead. What do you think about that idea of a climate trigger?
Well, David, as I said, Tanya is progressing very important reforms to the EPBC Act, which will be a big step forward. I'm likewise progressing reforms to the safeguard mechanism. The two are, if you like, both complementary but not related pieces of legislation.
You could have a view, though.
Well, my view is that we're getting on with the job of implementing the election mandate we got, which was to implement the Samuel Review, implement reforms to the safeguard mechanism.
What about a climate trigger? Do you think that's a good idea?
That's not what we're proposing, no. And I believe that the Samuel reforms that Tanya is progressing, which provide much more transparency to this matter, accompanied by the reforms that I'm proposing to the safeguard mechanism, which actually get real emissions reduction. I mean, a ton of emissions out of the
climate trigger is not a new idea, though. Way back in 2005, when you were in opposition, a private member's bill was introduced by one Anthony Albanese to introduce a climate trigger into the EPBC Act. If it was a good idea 18 years ago, why not now?
Well, we can all go back. I'm not sure what you were doing in 2005, David. I seem to remember you were doing lunchtime on Sky. I think you're doing lunchtimes on Sky, and I was a junior opposition backbencher. So, you know...
Anthony Albanese was introducing a bill for a climate trigger. Yeah,
well, the policies that we are implementing are not what anybody might have talked about in 2005. They're what we've got a mandate to implement in 2022. David. That's what we're implementing.
OK, a couple of other things. Snowy Hydro, I've got to ask you about Snowy 2.0. The big tunnel, one of the big tunnel boring machines is stuck underground. It's apparently stuck in some soft ground there. It's a little unclear exactly what's going to happen here. A huge hole has opened up above it. The tunnel maybe has collapsed. Can you give us an update about what's going on and how you're going to get it unstuck?
Well, I won't be down there with a shovel myself. What I will be doing is working very closely with Snowy management, which is what I've been doing. As you know, I'm not here to pretend to you that I'm happy about everything that has happened at Snowy 2.0, because I'm not. And it is delayed by at least 12 months, and that is deeply disappointing because it is important for the stability of our grid going forward. And when I came to office, one of the first pieces of advice the department gave me was that it was running 12 to 18 months late, and that had not been made public. And I took the decision that that should be made public immediately, and that we needed a plan in place to get it back on track. Now, David, I do recognise that this is one of the most complicated engineering projects underway anywhere in the world at the moment. I mean, these tunnels are difficult to build, but the previous government made commitments which are not being met in terms of timeline. The Finance Minister and I have appointed a new Chief Executive, Dennis Barnes. He knows that very high on his KPIs is getting this project as fast as humanly possible.
And what's he telling you about this machine? How are they going to get it out?
Well, they're working on all sorts of elements. It's not everything as is quite publicly presented, but the project is...
Why not? What's going to happen with this machine? Have they told you?
The project, I do get regular briefings, David. The project is moving too slowly for my liking.
But how are they going to get this out? Is it somehow top secret, or...?
Well, there's an engineering process underway to make more progress with the boring machine. Florence is its name, an affectionate name, I'm sure, but we need to make more progress on Snowy 2.0. It hasn't been fast enough. There have been other issues with Snowy 2.0. The government has, by appointing a new chief executive, in effect, asked for a completely fresh set of eyes, a completely fresh approach to what has been a problematic project which we inherited.
Sounds like these are underground matters that must remain confidential.
Well, I'm not here to give engineering advice to the experts in Snowy 2.0. I am here to encourage them to do more.
You mentioned the fact these delays keep coming, the costs keep going up. You know, it's well over the cost and the time frame that we were initially told about. Is it time to have an independent assessment, a reconsideration about the whole project?
Well, the project's important. It's a good project when it's finished. So the project will proceed, and importantly, of course, we're plugging it into the grid, which the previous government didn't do with our Rewiring the Nation announcements around that. They put money into the project, they didn't actually connect it to the grid. But in terms of an independent review, the ultimate independent review, David, is our new chief executive, and that's what we've done. Now, I want Snowy focused on that job. I don't want them, focused on trying to justify what's happened so far. I want them focused on fixing it. The Chair, David Knox, the Chief Executive, Dennis Barnes, at my request, are focused on fixing it, working closely with the Finance Minister and I. And, we need better progress on Snowy 2.0. I'm not here to pretend that it's all been smooth, because it has not been.
Final one, Minister, on hydrogen. On Friday, you met your state counterparts. You've agreed to... the need for an overhaul of the hydrogen strategy, given what's happening globally, particularly in the US. The Biden administration, they're pumping hundreds of billions of dollars into hydrogen and other renewables. It is a game changer. There are fears we're just going to be left behind. We'll lose our opportunity for the export and jobs boom. Ultimately, will governments have to spend billions more to get hydrogen off the ground?
Well, Australia has massive opportunities when it comes to green hydrogen exports. You're right about some of the challenges, but a couple of weeks ago I was in Germany releasing a report with the German minister which showed that green hydrogen exports from Australia to Germany are viable and desirable and feasible, and also stood with the German minister, a minister of the Federal Republic of Germany, who announced their funding of Australian green hydrogen projects in the Illawarra and South Australia. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary. You've got an Australian government and a German government working closely together to develop Australian green hydrogen projects, employing Australians, because Germany knows and other European countries know they can't provide enough green hydrogen for themselves, and Australia is a partner of choice. So yes, I did ask the state and territory ministers to agree with me to review our national hydrogen strategy, which was written in 2019, is now out of date compared to international developments. But I am very optimistic with the right policy settings, Australia can be a renewable energy export powerhouse, and green hydrogen will be right at the centre of those jobs and investment.
Chris Bowen, thanks for joining us this morning.
Great pleasure, David.